The morning sun cast long shadows across the private aviation terminal as Dr. Sarah Bennett guided her black Tesla Model S through the security gates. Her dark curly hair was neatly pulled back in a professional bun, and her navy blue suit was perfectly pressed, just as it had been for the past 15 years of her medical career. Today was supposed to be special. It marked her first flight as a fractional jet owner. At 42 years old, Sarah had worked incredibly hard to reach this point. Growing up in a middle-class family in Detroit, she had earned her way through medical school with scholarships and part-time jobs. Now, as one of the country's top neurosurgeons, she had finally decided to invest in private air travel. It wasn't about luxury. It was about reaching her patients faster when every minute counted. As she pulled into her designated parking spot, Sarah checked her phone one last time. There were 3 messages from Chicago General Hospital. The patient's condition was stable but deteriorating. They needed her expertise for a complex brain surgery, and she had promised to be there within 4 hours. This new travel arrangement would make that possible. Sarah gathered her things methodically, her small leather briefcase containing patient files, a carry-on with her personal items, and her credentials folder. The folder held everything she needed: her ID, medical license, and the new documentation proving her partial ownership in the private jet program. She had triple-checked everything the night before, a habit she had developed during her years of surgical training. The terminal building stood before her, its glass walls reflecting the morning light. It was smaller than the main airport terminal, but far more exclusive. Through the windows, Sarah could see other travelers, mostly business executives in expensive suits, moving about inside. A few staff members in crisp uniforms assisted passengers with their luggage. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing down her jacket. Even after all her accomplishments, moments like these still felt surreal. She remembered her mother's words from years ago: "Baby, you'll have to work twice as hard to get half as far." Sarah had proved that saying wrong, though the journey hadn't been easy. As she walked toward the entrance, her heels clicked confidently against the pavement. Several other passengers were arriving at the same time, a white couple in their 60s and a group of businessmen engrossed in their phones. Sarah noted how they were greeted with warm smiles by the ground staff, who rushed to help with their bags. The morning air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of jet fuel that Sarah had grown accustomed to over years of traveling for emergency surgeries. She checked her watch: 7:45 a.m. Her flight was scheduled for 8:30 a.m., giving her plenty of time to complete the necessary security procedures and boarding formalities. In her mind, Sarah was already reviewing the upcoming surgery. The patient was a 14-year-old boy with a rare brain tumor. His parents had specifically requested her, having read about her groundbreaking surgical techniques. This new travel arrangement would allow her to take on more such cases, helping patients who previously would have been too far away. As she approached the terminal's glass doors, Sarah could see her reflection, a successful black woman who had defied countless odds to reach this position. Her mother would have been proud to see her now, if she were still alive. Sarah adjusted her grip on her briefcase, containing the latest medical journals and surgical plans she had been reviewing the night before. The security guard stationed at the entrance stood straight as she approached. Sarah reached for her credentials, a motion she had performed thousands of times at hospitals and medical conferences across the country. She had no way of knowing that this routine moment was about to turn into something that would make headlines across the nation. A gentle breeze ruffled the flags flying above the terminal. American, state, and aviation company banners all waving in the morning air. Other travelers continued to arrive, their cars pulling up to the curb one after another. It was just another busy morning at the private aviation terminal, or at least it seemed that way. But in just a few minutes, everything would change. Security guard Thomas Rogers had worked at the private aviation terminal for 8 years. He stood at his post with his chest puffed out, his blue uniform pressed and badge gleaming. Most days were the same: checking credentials, greeting wealthy passengers, and maintaining what he called the right atmosphere at the exclusive terminal. When he saw Dr. Sarah Bennett approaching, Rogers straightened his back even more. His eyes narrowed as he watched her walking confidently toward the entrance. Without waiting for her to reach the door, he stepped forward, placing himself directly in her path. The morning sun cast his shadow across her path like a barrier. "Excuse me, ma'am," Rogers said, his voice carrying a tone that was anything but polite. "The main terminal is that way. He pointed toward the commercial airport building in the distance. This is a private aviation facility. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her heart had started beating faster. She had dealt with similar situations before, but it never got easier. "Good morning," she said calmly, opening her credentials folder. "I'm Dr. Sarah Bennett. I have a flight scheduled for 8:30. Rogers barely glanced at the documents she held out. "There must be some mistake," he said, speaking slowly as if talking to a child. "These jets are for members only. Very exclusive. Very expensive." He emphasized these last words while looking pointedly at her Tesla and her designer suit. "I am a member," Sarah replied, her voice steady. She pulled out her ownership documents and ID. "I'm a participating owner in the JET program. I have all the necessary documentation right here." She held the papers where Rogers couldn't ignore them. Other passengers were starting to notice the interaction. A small crowd began to gather, some pretending to check their phones while watching the scene unfold. Rogers felt their eyes on him but doubled down on his position. "Listen," he said, his voice getting louder. "I've worked here for years. I know our members. You must be confused." He took a step closer, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "Let me help you find your way to the main terminal." Sarah felt her medical license and Harvard diploma burning in her folder. 15 years of education, countless surgeries performed, lives saved, and still, she had to prove she belonged. She thought of her patient waiting in Chicago, his family counting on her. "Sir," she said, her voice clear enough for everyone to hear, "I am a neurosurgeon on my way to perform emergency surgery. I am a member of this JET program, and I have every right to be here. Please review my documentation properly." Rogers crossed his arms. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said firmly, "before we have a problem." His hand rested meaningfully on his security radio. The crowd had grown larger now. Some people had their phones out, recording the interaction. Among them was James Miller, a veteran pilot who had attended one of Dr. Bennett's lectures at a medical conference. He watched in disbelief as Rogers continued to block her path. Sarah felt the familiar weight of the situation on her shoulders. She could feel her phone buzzing in her pocket. Probably the hospital in Chicago checking on her arrival time. Every minute wasted here was a minute lost for her patient. "Mr. Rogers," she said, reading his name tag, "I understand you're doing your job. However, I'm going to give you one more chance to review my credentials properly. After that, I will be forced to take this matter to your superiors." Rogers smirked slightly, clearly not believing her implied connections to management. "Ma'am, if you don't leave now, I'll have to call security backup." He reached for his radio, his fingers wrapping around it with obvious satisfaction. The morning had grown warmer, but Sarah felt cold. She had prepared for this day for weeks. Her first private flight, a step forward in her career. Now she stood in the bright sunlight, surrounded by strangers, fighting a battle she shouldn't have to fight. But Dr. Sarah Bennett hadn't become one of the country's top neurosurgeons by backing down from challenges. She reached for her phone, her movements deliberate and calm. Rogers watched her, probably expecting her to call a taxi to leave. He had no idea that his next few minutes at work would be his last, and that this moment would soon be seen by millions across the country. The morning sun now beat down strongly on the growing crowd outside the private aviation terminal. What had started as a few curious onlookers had grown into a significant gathering of passengers, pilots, and airport staff. Everyone seemed to have forgotten their own travel plans, drawn instead to the unfolding drama at the entrance. James Miller, the veteran pilot who recognized Dr. Bennett, stepped away from the group he had been chatting with. At 58, with gray hair and kind eyes, he had seen plenty of unfair treatment in his 30 years of flying. 6 months ago, he had attended a medical conference where Dr. Bennett gave a speech about her revolutionary brain surgery techniques. He remembered being impressed not just by her expertise, but by her humble and professional manner. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to his co-pilot, pulling out his phone to record. Around him, at least 20 other phones were already raised, their cameras capturing every moment of the confrontation. The video would later go viral, but right now, the crowd was more focused on the real-time drama playing out before them. Among the spectators was Maria Rodriguez, a terminal cleaner who had paused her work to watch. She stood near the window, her cleaning cart forgotten beside her. Having worked at the terminal for 5 years, she had seen her fair share of entitled passengers, but this was different. She watched as Dr. Bennett maintained her composure despite Roger's increasingly aggressive behavior. "Someone should call management," whispered an elderly passenger to his wife. The woman nodded, already typing on her phone. Near them, a group of businessmen in expensive suits exchanged uncomfortable looks. They were regular users of the private terminal and had never seen anything like this. The tension in the air grew thicker as Rogers continued to block the entrance. His face had turned red, and sweat began to show through his uniform. Still, he stood his ground, seemingly unaware of how bad this looked to everyone watching. A younger security guard nearby shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain whether to intervene. Sarah remained steady, her phone now in her hand. The morning light caught the diamond studs in her ears, a gift she had bought herself after her first successful pediatric brain surgery. She was aware of the crowd but stayed focused on handling the situation professionally. "Isn't that Dr. Bennett?" a young flight attendant whispered to her colleague. "I saw her on the cover of Medical Innovation Monthly last week." The whispers spread through the crowd like a wave, and more people began to realize exactly who Rogers was trying to turn away. James Miller finally decided he couldn't stay quiet any longer. He stepped forward, his pilot's uniform commanding immediate attention. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice carrying across the space. "I can vouch for Dr. Bennett. I attended her keynote speech at the National Medical Aviation Conference in Boston." Rogers turned to glare at Miller, but the pilot's intervention had sparked something in the crowd. More people began to speak up. "I saw her on the news last month," someone called out. "She saved that little girl with the rare tumor." "She's performed surgery on my nephew," another voice added. "She's one of the best neurosurgeons in the country." The crowd had now swelled to nearly 40 people. The morning flights were being delayed as pilots and passengers stayed to witness what was happening. Even the coffee shop staff had stepped out to watch, paper cups forgotten in their hands. Sarah felt a mix of emotions as she heard these voices of support. While grateful, she shouldn't need others to validate her right to be there. Her credentials should have been enough. Her achievements should have been enough. Her humanity should have been enough. Through the terminal's glass walls, more staff members gathered in the lobby. A woman in a business suit was hurriedly walking toward the entrance, speaking urgently into her phone. She looked like someone from management, and her face showed she understood exactly how serious this situation was. The morning had turned into something none of these people had expected when they arrived at the terminal. Regular passengers who had planned to quickly board their flights now stood witness to a moment that would soon spark national conversation. Their phones kept recording, their voices kept rising, and their presence turned from a crowd into something more powerful, a community standing against injustice. No one knew it yet, but in just a few minutes, Dr. Sarah Bennett would handle this situation in a way that would not only resolve the immediate conflict, but would create lasting change. The crowd was about to witness something they would remember for years to come. Dr. Sarah Bennett had spent years making quick decisions in operating rooms where patients' lives hung in the balance. Now, standing in front of the private terminal, she drew on that same calm, focused energy. The crowd around her had grown quiet, waiting to see what she would do next. Instead of raising her voice or showing anger, Sarah did something unexpected. She smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but rather the kind of smile she used when explaining difficult situations to patients' families. She pulled out her phone and placed it on speaker mode, making sure everyone could hear. "I'm going to make 3 phone calls," she announced clearly, her voice carrying to the whole crowd. "First, to the aviation company's corporate office. Second, to my lawyer. And third, to the Chicago hospital where my patient is waiting." She looked directly at Rogers as she spoke. Rogers shifted his weight from one foot to the other, but tried to maintain his tough appearance. "Go ahead and call whoever you want," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Sarah dialed the first number, which she had saved in her contacts months ago when she joined the JET program. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. "Elite Aviation Corporate Office, how may I help you?" "Good morning," Sarah said clearly. "This is Dr. Sarah Bennett, member number 847,962. I'm currently at your Boston private terminal, where one of your security guards is refusing to let me enter, despite my having all proper documentation. I believe this is a clear case of racial discrimination, and it's being recorded by approximately 30 witnesses. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. The corporate officer's voice came back, suddenly much more alert. "Dr. Bennett, I deeply apologize. Could you describe the security guard?" "His name tag reads Thomas Rogers," Sarah replied calmly. "He's been working here for 8 years, according to what he told me, and he's currently preventing me from reaching my flight to Chicago, where I have a teenage patient waiting for emergency surgery." The crowd watched as Rogers' face turned from red to pale. Some people were nodding in approval at Sarah's professional handling of the situation. James Miller, the pilot who had spoken up earlier, was still recording everything on his phone. "Dr. Bennett, please stay on the line," the corporate voice said urgently. The sound of rapid typing could be heard in the background. "I'm contacting the terminal manager right now. This is completely unacceptable." Sarah kept the phone on speaker as she pulled up her patient's file on her tablet. "While we wait," she said to the corporate officer, "I'd like to note that this delay is being documented in my patient's medical file. As his surgeon, I'm required to record any delays that might affect his care." A murmur of approval went through the crowd. Several people nodded, impressed by her strategic thinking. Even some of the other security guards were looking at Rogers with disapproval now. Through the terminal's glass doors, they could see people running around inside. A woman in a sharp business suit was rushing toward the entrance, her heels clicking rapidly against the floor. She had a look of panic on her face that most managers get when they realize a PR disaster is unfolding on their watch. Sarah stood perfectly still, her phone still broadcasting the sounds of urgent activity from the corporate office. Her medical bag hung professionally at her side, containing the files she had studied late into the previous night, preparing for today's surgery. The morning sun highlighted her calm face, showing not a single sign of the anger she had every right to feel. "Corporate is sending an email to all terminals right now," the voice on the phone announced. "We're implementing immediate policy changes. Dr. Bennett, the terminal manager, is heading to your location. Please accept our deepest apologies." Rogers was now looking around nervously, probably realizing that his job wasn't the only thing he was about to lose. His actions would soon become a viral video, a training example, and a turning point for the company's hiring policies. The crowd continued to grow as word spread through the terminal. Sarah's professional response was about to accomplish more than anger ever could. In just a few minutes, she would walk through those doors with an escort of apologetic managers, leaving behind a security guard who had learned a powerful lesson about prejudice and professionalism. The terminal manager, Mrs. Linda Chen, burst through the glass doors like a storm. Her usual neat appearance was slightly ruffled. She had run down 3 flights of stairs after hearing about the situation. Behind her came 2 other managers and the head of terminal security, all of them looking deeply concerned. "Dr. Bennett," Mrs. Chen called out, slightly out of breath, "I cannot begin to express how sorry we are." She shot a fierce look at Rogers, who had finally stepped away from the entrance. His face was now pale, and his earlier confidence had completely disappeared. The crowd parted to make way for Mrs. Chen, who approached Sarah with an extended hand. The contrast between her welcome and Rogers' treatment was stark and obvious to everyone watching. Some people were still recording on their phones, capturing every moment of this dramatic turn of events. "Please, come inside immediately," Mrs. Chen said, gesturing toward the terminal. "Your flight crew has been notified, and they're preparing for immediate departure. We won't delay your patient's surgery any further." She turned to face the crowd, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "What happened here today is completely unacceptable and does not reflect our company's values." As Sarah walked through the doors, something unexpected happened. It started with James Miller, the pilot who had recognized her earlier. He began to clap. The sound echoed across the terminal entrance, and within seconds, others joined in. The applause grew louder and louder, filling the morning air with a powerful sound of support. Rogers stood to the side, his shoulders slumped, as his supervisor approached him. "Turn in your badge," the head of security said firmly. "You're suspended effective immediately, pending termination." The supervisor's voice was cold as ice. 8 years of service ends here because you couldn't treat a respected doctor with basic human dignity." Inside the terminal, things moved quickly. Staff members rushed to handle Dr. Bennett's luggage, while others cleared a path to the private jet area. The other passengers, many of whom had witnessed the entire incident, nodded respectfully as she passed by. Mrs. Chen walked alongside Sarah, speaking rapidly. "We're upgrading you to our premium jet service at no extra cost," she explained. "Your membership will be upgraded to platinum level, also at no cost to you. But we know none of this makes up for what happened." Sarah maintained her professional composure, though she allowed herself a small smile at the sight of Rogers being escorted to the security office, his badge and security card already confiscated. The other security guards, who had watched everything, stood straighter as she passed, offering respectful nods. "Your patient in Chicago," Mrs. Chen continued, checking her tablet. "We've already contacted the hospital. The jet will get you there 30 minutes faster than originally scheduled. We've arranged for priority takeoff clearance." The terminal staff moved with unusual speed, processing Sarah's documents and handling her security screening with utmost respect. The same premises that Rogers had tried to deny her access to now opened up before her like a welcoming red carpet. Outside, the crowd slowly began to disperse, but not before many of them had shared their videos online. Social media was already buzzing with the incident, and news reporters would soon be calling the terminal for comments. Mrs. Chen knew she would spend the rest of her day dealing with the fallout, but right now, her priority was ensuring Dr. Bennett's smooth departure. As Sarah walked toward her waiting jet, she passed the terminal's wall of honor, where photos of distinguished members hung. Mrs. Chen made a mental note to add Dr. Bennett's photo to that wall, not because of this incident, but because of her actual achievements that Rogers had so blindly ignored. The pilot, co-pilot, and flight attendant stood at attention near the jet's stairs, all of them having been briefed about the situation. They welcomed her with genuine warmth and respect, eager to demonstrate that Rogers' attitude was not representative of their company. Just before boarding, Sarah turned to Mrs. Chen. "Make sure something good comes from this," she said quietly. "It's not about me, it's about making sure this never happens to anyone else." Mrs. Chen nodded solemnly, knowing that Dr. Bennett's words would shape the company's actions in the coming weeks. As the jet's engine started up, the morning sun reflected off its polished surface, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, one that would bring significant changes to the private aviation industry. By the time Dr. Sarah Bennett's private jet landed in Chicago, her face was all over the internet. The videos taken by the crowd had spread like wildfire across social media platforms. People weren't just sharing the confrontation with Rogers, they were sharing the way she had handled it. Sarah's phone started buzzing nonstop as she walked through Chicago's private terminal. News reporters were calling, social media notifications were popping up, and messages of support were flooding in from fellow doctors, patients, and strangers from around the world. "Dr. Bennett, how do you feel about becoming a viral sensation?" a reporter called out as she walked to her waiting car. Several journalists had somehow found out about her arrival. She paused briefly, knowing her response would be important. "Right now, my focus is on my patient," she said clearly. "A 14-year-old boy is waiting for brain surgery, and that's what matters most." Her simple, professional answer would later be praised as a perfect example of staying focused on what truly mattered. In the car heading to the hospital, Sarah quickly checked her phone. The numbers were staggering. The main video had over 2 million views. Her name was trending on Twitter. Medical associations were posting messages of support. The private aviation company's stock price had dropped by 3%. But what caught her attention most was a message from a young black girl. "Dear Dr. Bennett, I want to be a doctor too. Thank you for showing me how to be strong and professional even when people try to stop you." At Chicago General Hospital, the staff had already seen the videos. As Sarah walked through the halls toward the surgery preparation area, she received respectful nods and smiles from everyone she passed. Her patient's parents were waiting anxiously. "We saw what happened this morning," the boy's mother said, tears in her eyes. "And you still made it here for our son." She grabbed Sarah's hands. "Thank you for not letting that man stop you from helping our child." Sarah squeezed her hands gently. "Your son's health is my priority," she said. "Now, let me go get ready to help him." She headed to the surgical preparation room, leaving the viral storm outside. Meanwhile, back at the private terminal in Boston, the video continued to spread. Different angles of the incident appeared online, showing Rogers blocking the entrance. The growing crowd of supporters. Sarah's calm phone call. The manager's swift action. The applause from the crowd. Social media users praised her response. No shouting, no drama, just pure professionalism. That's how you handle racism. Watch how she used her phone and the crowd as witnesses. Smart. This is what real strength looks like. By evening, after successfully completing the surgery, Sarah sat in her hotel room looking at her phone. Major news networks wanted interviews. Civil rights organizations wanted her to speak at events. The private aviation company had issued a public statement announcing major changes. Immediate review of all security staff. New training programs on bias and discrimination. Changes in hiring practices. A promise to do better. Sarah decided to post one simple message online. Thank you for all the support. Today, I performed successful brain surgery on a brave young man. That's what I want to focus on. However, if my experience helps create positive change, then something good has come from it. Remember, respond to bias with professionalism, document everything, and keep focusing on your goals. Her post quickly gained hundreds of thousands of likes and shares. People were impressed that even with all the attention, she kept the focus on her patient and on creating positive change. The day ended very differently from how it had begun. What started as an attempt to block her from boarding a plane had turned into a moment that would be used in training videos, discussed in corporate meetings, and taught in schools. As Sarah prepared for bed, she received one last message from the aviation company's CEO, personally apologizing and asking for her help in creating new company policies. She smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to create real change. The viral moment wasn't just about her anymore. It had become about making things better for everyone who might face similar situations in the future. 1 week after the incident, the CEO of Elite Aviation, Michael Thompson, sat at the head of a long conference table. Around him sat board members, diversity consultants, and most importantly, Dr. Sarah Bennett herself. The company had taken immediate action, and today they would announce their comprehensive plan for change. Dr. Bennett, Thompson began, his voice sincere, your experience has opened our eyes. We thought having policies was enough. We were wrong. He pushed forward a thick folder labeled Change Initiative 2024. We want you to review our new plans before we announce them. Sarah picked up the folder and began reading. The company had created a detailed plan. Firing of Thomas Rogers and review of all security staff. New hiring practices to create a more diverse workforce. Monthly training sessions for all employees. Clear reporting system for discrimination incidents. Regular checks on staff behavior and attitude. Better security cameras with audio recording. New customer service standards. But what impressed Sarah most was the section about community involvement. The company planned to start a scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation careers. They would also partner with medical organizations to provide special flight services for doctors traveling for emergency surgeries. We want to do more than just fix what went wrong, Thompson explained. We want to lead the industry in making real change. He looked nervous as he waited for Sarah's response. Sarah closed the folder and looked around the room. Some of the board members who had seemed uncomfortable at the start of the meeting now sat straighter, paying close attention to her every word. Your plans look good on paper, she said carefully. But what matters is how you put them into action. I'll help, but I want to see real results. Her voice was firm but fair, the same tone she used when training young doctors. Thompson nodded quickly. We've already started. Would you like to see? He pressed a button on his desk phone. Send them in, please. The conference room door opened, and in walked 5 new faces. 2 black women, 1 Hispanic man, 1 Asian woman, and 1 man in a wheelchair. Meet our new terminal managers, Thompson announced. All highly qualified professionals who should have been hired years ago. They start training next week. Sarah smiled, seeing the first signs of real change. The new managers looked confident and capable, exactly what the company needed. One of them, a black woman named Rachel Carter, stepped forward. Dr. Bennett, Rachel said, your story inspired me to apply for this position. I've worked in aviation for 15 years, but never thought I could get a management role. Now I'll make sure no one faces what you faced. The meeting continued for several hours. Sarah reviewed each part of the plan carefully, suggesting improvements based on her experience. The board members took notes and asked thoughtful questions. This wasn't just about avoiding bad publicity anymore. They truly wanted to do better. By the end of the day, Elite Aviation had hired 5 new diverse terminal managers, created a new anti-discrimination task force, set up a 24-hour hotline for reporting incidents, started planning their scholarship program, scheduled company-wide training sessions, updated their security protocols, enhanced their customer service standards. As Sarah prepared to leave, Thompson had one more surprise. "We've created a new position," he said. "Chief Diversity Advisor. We'd like you to take it as a part-time role alongside your medical career. Your experience and wisdom would be invaluable." Sarah thought about the young girl who had messaged her about wanting to become a doctor. "I'll accept," she said, "on one condition. I want to be involved in the scholarship program. Those students will need mentoring, not just money." Thompson agreed immediately. As Sarah walked out of the corporate headquarters, she saw workers taking down the old company posters and putting up new ones showing a diverse group of employees and customers. It wasn't just for show, real change was happening. The media reported the company's actions positively. Elite Aviation sets new industry standards. From viral video to real change. How one incident transformed a company. Corporate America takes notice as Elite Aviation leads in diversity. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Rachel Carter. "First day of training done. Already planning changes at my terminal. Thank you for making this possible." Sarah smiled, knowing that sometimes it takes one moment of standing firm to create lasting change. 3 months after the incident, Dr. Sarah Bennett stood once again at the entrance of the Boston private terminal. Everything looked different now. The security desk was staffed by a diverse team. New welcome signs hung in multiple languages, and the Wall of Honor now displayed photos showing people of all backgrounds. Rachel Carter, one of the new terminal managers, greeted Sarah with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Dr. Bennett. How was your surgery in Detroit?" The two women had become friends over the past months, working together to implement the company's new policies. "The patient is recovering well," Sarah replied, adjusting her medical bag. She noticed how smoothly everything ran now. Passengers of all races and backgrounds moved through the terminal easily, treated with equal respect by the well-trained staff. The biggest change was in the small details. Security guards who smiled and helped everyone. Staff members who looked like the diverse customers they served. Clear signs explaining passenger rights. Cameras recording all interactions. A help desk specifically for addressing concerns. Photos of the new scholarship winners on display. Sarah walked past the spot where Rogers had once blocked her path. Now, that space had a special plaque. "Respect, dignity, and equal treatment for all, our unwavering commitment." Below it hung a framed copy of Elite Aviation's new service pledge, written in clear, bold letters. The morning crew recognized her immediately. Many were graduates of the company's new training program, which used video from her incident as a teaching tool. But they didn't treat her like a celebrity. They treated her exactly as they treated every other passenger, with professional respect and courtesy. "Your flight is ready, Dr. Bennett," a young black flight attendant said. "We prepared everything according to your preferences." Sarah had become one of the company's most frequent flyers, traveling to hospitals across the country for emergency surgeries. As she walked through the terminal, Sarah noticed a group of high school students touring the facility. They were part of the new aviation career program she had helped create. Among them was Maria, the young girl who had first messaged her after the viral video. Now she was learning about career opportunities in aviation and medicine. "Dr. Bennett," Maria called out excitedly, "I got accepted into pre-med." The other students gathered around, many of them recognizing Sarah from their training materials. She spent a few minutes talking with them, encouraging their dreams just as she had been encouraged years ago. The changes hadn't stopped at Elite Aviation. Other companies had followed their example. Airlines improved their diversity training. Private terminals updated their security practices. Medical transport services created better policies. Companies across industries reviewed their hiring practices. Schools used the incident to teach about professional responses to discrimination. Thomas Rogers, the former security guard, had become a cautionary tale in corporate training sessions. But even his story had a positive twist. He had gone through extensive sensitivity training and now spoke at schools about the importance of treating everyone with respect. Sarah checked her watch as she approached her waiting jet. In Chicago, another young patient needed her help. But now, the journey was different. No more battles at the terminal, no more proving she belonged. Just a doctor doing her job, helping people who needed her skills. The pilot today was a young Hispanic woman, another sign of the changing times. "Beautiful morning for flying, Dr. Bennett," she said professionally. Sarah smiled, remembering how rare it had been to see female pilots just a few months ago. Before boarding, Sarah paused to look back at the terminal. A new family was entering, a black couple with 2 young daughters. The security team welcomed them warmly, efficiently checking their credentials without a hint of bias. The little girls looked around with big dreams in their eyes, seeing people who looked like them in positions of authority. As her plane took off into the morning sky, Sarah thought about how one moment of standing firm had created ripples of change. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Elite Aviation CEO. "Board meeting next week. New initiatives to discuss. Your input invaluable." The incident that could have been just another viral video had instead become a turning point. Real change had taken root, growing stronger each day. And somewhere in Chicago, a patient was waiting for the doctor who had not only saved lives in the operating room, but had also helped change countless lives by standing her ground with dignity and professionalism.